Hello students, this is Priyanka ma'am here. Let's once again continue with the first chapter, life processes. So today we are going to look at the following topics: heterotrophic nutrition in amoeba, nutrition in humans, and finally respiration. So let's begin with heterotrophic nutrition in amoeba. As you can see here, the diagram is important. Usually in the board exam, the diagram along with the explanation, both of it is asked. So please make sure that you are practicing the diagram. If you can see here, the first, there are four stages actually. Here there are five of them, of course, mentioned. Why did I say four? Because absorption and assimilation are considered to be one particular stage in heterotrophic nutrition in amoeba. So anyhow, let's go with this. In the first particular stage, you can see it's called as ingestion. In ingestion, what happens? The pseudopodia completely encircles the food particle, as you can see here, and the process by what it does this is called as phagocytosis. Yes, once the food particle is completely encircled, the amoeba completely is able to absorb the food particle into its body. Once the food particle enters into the body of the amoeba, the food vacuole, which is already present in the amoeba, comes into action, and you will see that the food vacuole itself has got a lot of digestive enzymes. So digestion of this particular food particle starts taking place by in the second stage. That is what is digestion. The third and the fourth stage, like what I said, we club it as one: absorption and assimilation. Well, it's nothing but absorption of whatever digested particles are there takes place in the cytoplasm. So basically the digested part enters into the cytoplasm, and this is where the absorption takes place. And finally, assimilation. What is the meaning of assimilation? Assimilation means utilization. So whatever food is being broken down, it has to be utilized for certain processes, maybe for energy, maybe it could be for repair of old cells, maybe for reproduction of amoeba. For several processes, you will see that the broken down food has to be assimilated or used up by the amoeba by this process called assimilation. So that is what happens over here. And finally, you can see egestion. So whatever has been undigested, that has to go out of the body. So you will again see that the cell membrane kind of breaks out and releases the unwanted particles. I have once again, written down all these things. So it's the same thing what is being explained. You can make sure that the same thing is being written in your notebooks also, because we have already asked in the assignment questions which are already sent through the app. It has been asked already to explain nutrition in amoeba along with the diagram. So make sure that you do explain all these stages as well as you draw the diagram neatly and label it. Labeling is very important. Not even half a mark will be awarded if you neatly draw and forget to label. So remember students, this is not an art exam. It is a biology, or in fact a science exam. So for all the science diagrams, you are expected to draw and label without fail. Let's move to nutrition in humans. Now, when we talk about amoeba, we can summarize the entire process and say that yes, amoeba is able to digest its food particles by a simple process called diffusion. But diffusion cannot take place in a larger organism like humans for that matter. So in case of humans, we can say that nutrition in humans is actually only by a complex process which is called as digestion. And this digestion takes place, of course, with the help of a digestive system. Our digestive system is divided into two subtypes. One is the alimentary canal, which is about 8 to 10 meters long, running right from the mouth till the anus. And along with the alimentary canal, embedded in it are organs and glands. So organs starting from the mouth and salivary gland, of course, which is present, stomach, small intestine, pancreas, liver, large intestine, and anus. So I have included the glands and organs together. So that's why I've mentioned both of them together. Let's see how this digestion in humans actually starts. So before I begin, think about your favorite food which you like, something which really waters your mouth. Well, it could be pizza, it could be burger for some, it could be dosa, it could be pav bhaji, it could be what gobi manchuri, pani puri, or maybe it could be even very nice, maybe chocolate truffle cake or something. Well, if things have mouth what basically watered your mouth, let's start with the diagram of your digestive system. Yes, digestion begins right in the mouth. That is the reason why I told you this. You can see the labelings here. Our mouth is there, esophagus. Yes, they have labeled tongue. This is exactly the diagram as per the NCRT textbook. So NCRT has given you this diagram. Please observe there is one labeling which is the diaphragm. Why is diaphragm present here in a digestive system diagram? Many a time students forget to label the diaphragm. They forget to even draw the diaphragm for that matter. They only focus on mouth, esophagus, stomach and all that, small intestine, large intestine, anus and all this, liver, pancreas, bile duct. Here also, look at this. Appendix is their gallbladder. These are the three circlings which I have circled mainly to, emphasize that students, please do not forget to label these parts. These parts are extremely important. It's very simple. The topic is extremely simple, but students forget, to label all these minute details and therefore they lose marks. So please do not lose marks. Biology is not very difficult to score, but if you are careless, you may lose marks. So please don't lose marks in this. I will tell you why is the diaphragm extremely important. Gallbladder, I'm sure you would have understood, somewhere associated with bile duct. So that's the reason why, and it's already written there, it stores bile. So that's why it's very important. Appendix also, we know why it could be important, but diaphragm. Now, where did diaphragm come here? Let's look at it much in detail a little later. So, beginning with the definition of digestion, it is the process of breaking down larger and complex molecules of food into simple and small molecules by the action of hydrolytic enzymes. Now, why is it important? Because it has to diffuse through the intestinal wall or through the gut wall. So, as 10 standard students, please do not stop your definition till here. Many times students just write breaking down large and complex molecules into small molecules. That is digestion. No. How is it possible? By the action of hydrolytic enzymes. Why? To diffuse through the gut wall. Only if it is very, very small, only then it can move through the intestinal wall. That is why it is important. Digestion is very important. Coming to the parts in the alimentary canal, as you can see, mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and these are the subparts of each of them, which we are not really going to go in detail as such, but you just need to know them. Coming to the 5 nutrients, I'm sure you all are very much aware: carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, okay, are very important, and they are the important nutrients. So whatever we are eating, are finally going to get absorbed into our body in the form of these nutrients. So let's see how all this takes place. As I said, it's not a very easy process, for nutrition in humans. It involves organs, it involves glands and so on, but very importantly, it also involves enzymes. Enzymes are biocatalysts which speed up our chemical reactions so that digestions can take place faster and the end products are not going to get altered at all very easily. So that is the reason why enzymes are important. Enzymes will ensure that chemical reactions take place faster without altering the end products, and they don't alter themselves also. So when we thought of our mouth-watering food, something which you thought of has brought in some water into your mouth. That water is nothing but saliva. Saliva secreted by salivary glands. It is alkaline in nature, and the enzyme which is present is salivary amylase or ptyalin for that matter. Even if you people write salivary amylase, it is fine. Breaks down starch or glycogen into maltose. That's important. And there is some amount of mucus, a sticky type present in the saliva. This mucus moistens and lubricates the food to form bolus. So if at all you have chewed the food completely, that semi-solid form of the food is called as bolus. Can you look at this diagram given right over here? I have showed how the food passes through the esophagus by a movement called peristalsis. Contraction and relaxation of the esophagus is called peristalsis. I'll repeat that: contraction and relaxation of the esophagus when food is passing by, or when the bolus is passing by, rather. I would make that very clear. When the bolus is passing by, that is called as peristalsis. So now, after esophagus, the food is now entering into one of the most strongest organs in our body, which is the stomach. Why did I call it the strongest organ? We all are aware that the stomach secretes hydrochloric acid, HCl. And that is why our alkaline food has now become acidic. What does this hydrochloric acid do? It converts, of course, the food from alkaline to acidic, but importantly, it activates pepsin. What is this pepsin? Pepsin is a part of your gastric juice present in the stomach. And this pepsin helps to break down proteins into peptones and peptides also. I'll make a note of that. It is peptide also. So peptones and peptides, this is T, this is not F. Okay, so and of course your lipase, which is also present, helps in digestion of fats into fatty acids and glycerol. Students, please note, you need to know the enzyme, you need to know how it acts on, you need to know the end products also, the starting product and the end product. That's why I have given it in the form of a table here. Coming to another very small, enzyme, which is called as renin. Renin helps to digest casein into paracasein, basically seen in milk. So renin completely helps to digest this casein into paracasein. What happens after this? After the stomach, the acidic food now has to be somewhere made alkaline. How is it made alkaline? The moment food leaves the stomach, it enters into the duodenum, that is the beginning of the small intestine. If you would have seen the stomach, and there is a small loop like structure, this part is called as your duodenum. So here it is mixed with bile juice and pancreatic juice. Now we all know that bile juice is very, very important. It is only secreted by the action of a part which is called as gallbladder. Yes, I hope you remember the previous, diagram which we had actually, I was talking about. Let's go back to it just for a moment. Yes. Can you see here? Gallbladder stores bile, and the moment bile is required, the bile duct is going to squeeze and release this particular bile. So this particular bile is now going to come right over here, near this duodenum area, so that this mixture can now enter into your small intestine. So what does bile help to do? Bile helps to emulsify your fat, and it neutralizes the medium. That is, when the food came from the stomach, the food was in an acidic medium. You can see here, food was in a complete acidic medium, and now the food is moving into an alkaline medium, all thanks to our bile juice. The bile juice, which is present actually in the gallbladder. Okay, and that's where, it's at the, you can see it's at the bottom of the liver, and that's where again liver plays a very important role. Okay, because it is connected very much to it. And finally, emulsification of fats happens. I'm not sure, but have you all, seen how when you wash vessels, probably if you are, washing a very sticky, oily plate, greasy plate, I'm sure only with the help of water, definitely that stain will not go. That stain goes only when you apply probably some amount of soap or some amount of detergent. So emulsification actually means that emulsification means you are breaking down your fatty molecules into simpler molecules so that it can be digested completely. Because please remember, actually digestion of fats takes place in the small intestine by the action of lipase. Yes, bile is very important, no doubt. Bile is extremely important because it is helping in emulsification, that is breaking down. But actual digestion of fats happens in the small intestine by the action of lipase alone. It forms fatty acid and glycerol. Coming to our maltose, you remember maltose actually got digested over here. Let me show you that. Our maltose got digested in the mouth. Here you go. Starch completely got digested, into maltose. So what happens now? If at all this maltose has to be further digested, which usually happens, it is digested by maltase or even sometimes by amylase also. So you can also write amylase, because any leftover starch is present, it is going to get digested by our amylase. Leftover, I am repeating that, leftover carbohydrates are going to get digested in the small intestine by amylase, and the product it is going to form is glucose. Coming to trypsin, trypsin is going to, now previous case here, we didn't call it trypsin, we called it pepsin. And now here in the small intestine, it is called trypsin. Trypsin is going to help in digestion of peptides and peptones into amino acids. So in short, fats, carbohydrates and proteins are all digested here in the small intestine. Small intestine is extremely important because absorption of these nutrients directly into the blood will take place in the small intestine. I am repeating this point. Absorption of the nutrients from the small intestine into the blood will take place from this particular place alone. So that's why the small intestine is extremely important. Now, these are the important roles which you need to remember for the exam point of view also. They have often asked the role of HCl, which creates an acidic medium. That's number one. Kills the bacteria if present, if they are present along with the food. Activates pepsin. That's again very important. And of course, the mucus layer, which is present in the wall of the stomach, helps the stomach from getting corroded. Now, nobody, would have wondered that, oh, there is HCl present now produced in the stomach itself. HCl is present in the stomach itself, but how is it that the stomach itself is not getting corroded? It's all thanks to the mucus layer which is present in the wall of the stomach. So that prevents the stomach from getting corroded. Coming to the liver, liver is the largest gland, and we say that the liver produces bile because gallbladder considered to be a part of the liver alone. That's the reason why we say that. And apart from this, it detoxifies the blood and also stores extra glucose as glycogen. So if there is any extra glucose which is formed where? In the small intestine. You remember that? Extra glucose. So after glucose getting produced here, if there is anything extra, it goes directly into the liver and it stores over there. Small intestine is important because it helps to absorb the nutrients into the blood because of the finger-like projections called villi. Yes, villi is important because it helps in absorption. And finally, large intestine is also important because it absorbs all the water and pushes the waste into the anus for expulsion. So again, I'm repeating, large intestine absorbs all the water. This has been asked that what is the role of the large intestine. So you need to write absorption of water and pushing the waste into the anus for expulsion or excretion. So that was about the digestive system. Now moving on to the respiratory system, which is the second part of the presentation here. Respiration is the process by which your food molecules are broken down to release energy in the form of ATP. Now please pay attention. There is definitely a difference between breathing and respiration. Breathing is simple inhaling and exhaling. That sort of an external type of an arrangement which happens or which is seen externally is called breathing. What happens after breathing? What happens after you inhale? After inhaling, your food materials have to get broken down to release energy. So digestion, yes, definitely takes place, but respiration is also important because your glucose has to get broken down. Glucose has to get broken down to release energy in the form of ATP, and that is called as respiration. This is again a very important diagram. You need to label the parts as what is being given right over here. So please do not forget to label it in this particular manner, and without fail make sure that in the trachea when you label you are going to make sure that yes, you are going to have like this ring like structures as what is being shown here. That has to be labeled in that fashion itself. So it is often asked. Let's go to the types of respiration. As we are aware, there are two types. One is aerobic and the other is anaerobic. Aerobic respiration requires oxygen, as the name suggests. Anaerobic takes place in the absence of oxygen. Remember when we had spoken about the previous presentation when I had done, we were speaking about photosynthesis, and we also spoke about how this glucose is getting formed and what happens. Well, glucose gets further broken down by a process called glycolysis, and after glycolysis, as I said, there are other processes like this. Finally it produces 36 ATP molecules. So you need to know that after aerobic respiration, I'm sorry, after aerobic respiration, glucose produces 36 ATP molecules. It undergoes a series of breakdown. Okay, and it produces 36 ATP molecules. Whereas anaerobic respiration also undergoes glycolysis, but finally you can see the difference here. This is called fermentation. There are two types of fermentations that can take place. One is alcoholic, which usually you would have seen the classic example of grapes turning into wine. That is happening in the presence of yeast. Because of yeast, it takes place, and that is called alcoholic fermentation. And the second is called lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation happens in our muscles. So muscle cells actually undergo this lactic acid fermentation, and look at this, the amount of energy, it's just 2 ATP molecules. So when compared to aerobic, anaerobic is very, very less. So this is important for you all. Again, this is present in the NCERT textbook, but it's very, very important what happens exactly. And when asked also the definition of aerobic and anaerobic, you are expected to write it in a word form, at least in this particular form you are expected to write. So when glucose in the cytoplasm, important word, when glucose in the cytoplasm breaks down into pyruvate, okay, and this pyruvate, in the absence of oxygen, which is seen in yeast, in the absence of oxygen further breaks down into ethanol, releasing out carbon dioxide and energy, that is 2 ATP molecules. You remember that it is written 2 ATP molecules. This is called as anaerobic respiration, or I would rather call this as fermentation, because it is taking place in yeast. So I'm repeating this point. Fermentation in yeast, if it is asked, usually the question could be like, grapes turn into wine. How or what happens, when grapes turn into wine? You can observe, or at least if you would have read that, yes, there is some amount of alcohol and some amount of effervescence, that is few bubbles are also present in that particular wine part as it is getting produced. Why? Because again I'm repeating, glucose, in the it converts to pyruvate in the cytoplasm, and this pyruvate in yeast, in the absence of oxygen, it releases out ethanol, carbon dioxide, and 2 ATP molecules. This is called fermentation. Coming to what is lactic acid accumulation. Lactic acid accumulation is nothing but glucose in the cytoplasm when it breaks down into pyruvate. Again, in our muscle cells, it will produce lactic acid and again 2 ATP molecules. That is called as lactic acid accumulation. Lactic acid accumulation, that is important, takes place in our muscle cells. Coming to aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is a process in which glucose in the cytoplasm breaks down into pyruvate, and this pyruvate in the presence of oxygen, where in mitochondria, converts into or breaks down into carbon dioxide, water, and here how much energy is released? It is 36 ATP molecules. So when 36 ATP molecules are released in the form of in the form of energy, it's aerobic respiration. So I hope this is clear. You can see these are anaerobic and this is aerobic respiration that is taking place. I have, for those of you who are very inquisitive about glycolysis, I've given the entire pathway, but this is really extra information. It's only if you're very curious to know how glucose converts to pyruvate, why and how it's said, but this is not for 10th standard students, not for the board exam. It's only for your reference alone. Coming to the board exam question, which is really important. Yes, now differences between aerobic and anaerobic as already discussed is there. Please, if possible, write down the equation, the chemical form of the equation as what it is being given over here. And of course, kilocalories and all are given. If you're able to remember that, fine. Otherwise, even if you write it as 38 and 2, it's fine. Now, you may wonder, why is it 38? I had told 36, 36, 36. Well, can you look here in both the cases? If you can see, yeah, when I was talking about this, can you see here? I'll mark this in green so that it's highlighted. Cytoplasm here and mitochondria, correct? So glucose kind of moves, or the molecules move from cytoplasm to mitochondria. So technically, we say 38 ATP molecules are produced in the end, but this movement, no, from cytoplasm to mitochondria and all that, that's why 2 ATP molecules are getting utilized, and the net ATP molecule is 36 ATP molecules. I'm repeating this. Glucose, once it's broken down into pyruvate, pyruvate kind of moves, from cytoplasm to mitochondria. This movement takes place. So that's the reason why 2 ATP molecules are used up during the process. Actually, in the entire process, 38 ATP molecules are produced. But when this movement takes place, no, 2 ATP molecules are used up. That is why the net ATP is 36. So that is why if you write 36 is better. If you write 38, it's also fine, but that's the total energy. Okay, that's not the net energy. So I would prefer if you write 36. Even if you write 38, please mention total. If you write 36, you will definitely get the marks. So not to worry about it. Coming to the gaseous exchange. So what happens after this glucose is kind of, broken down? We know that, the main idea, what we have learnt is, yes, we all breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. We know that it goes into the lungs, and from there is what the whole process will actually take place. But what exactly happens? This is very, very important. Now pay close attention to what I am trying to say. We all breathe in air from the nose. So from the nose, basically the entire mixture of gases, especially which is rich in oxygen, that is what we want. Oxygen is taken in, goes into the nostrils, moves through the pharynx, the larynx, through the trachea, enters into the lungs. The lungs have got, they have got, they're branched actually, they've got branches because the trachea is branched further into bronchi, bronchiole, and it ends up in a round tissue like structure which is called as alveoli. So this is an enlarged view of an alveoli, and you can see here that whatever oxygen is getting into us, into our nose, moves into the lungs, and this is helping to diffuse into the RBCs and completely allowing your carbon dioxide to move out. So I'll repeat this once again. Blood from the pulmonary artery, actually it is deoxygenated blood. Okay, so pulmonary artery is the only artery which carries deoxygenated blood from the heart that we are aware of. Now this Deoxygenated blood is represented with blue color. The moment we are, inhaling oxygen, this blue gets converted into red and it goes away. Whereas, whatever is remaining, whatever waste after this, it is carbon dioxide, it diffuses back. Let's look at the next diagram. I think this could be much clear. Yeah, you can see here the particles that are coming in. So basically, over here this blue color is nothing but, the deoxygenated blood, which is, let's say it could be more of carbon dioxide, that is what is present. And you can see that it is now getting oxygenated. Oxygen is entering and it is converting it into, oxygenated, that is the red blood cells, activating the red blood cells. How are the red blood cells getting activated? Because of the presence of hemoglobin. Yes, hemoglobin is nothing but an iron containing or an iron containing pigment, carries oxygen to all parts of the body. So during this exchange we can see that some amount of, yes, as this change is taking place, as this transformation is taking place, no, carbon dioxide is leaving out. So the moment oxygen is entering, carbon dioxide is leaving outside. And this change is possible only because of hemoglobin present in the red blood cells. So because the red blood cells contain hemoglobin, they are able to immediately absorb oxygen, and the moment they absorb oxygen, carbon dioxide leaves the lungs and moves outside. So I have summarized the entire pathway as present over here. You can go through this a little bit in detail, as it's very simple, given in simple language. Why? Because I've given the conclusion part and I have put it in a table form, so that would be much better. This is important because you need to know one important point here. As I said, when you draw the diagram of the trachea, you make sure you draw rings. Why? Because rings of cartilage are present in the trachea to prevent it from collapsing. So when less air is entering inside it prevents the trachea from collapsing because cartilaginous rings are present around the trachea. That's important. This is the concluding part of it. We are coming to the conclusion of it. Differences between inhalation or inspiration and exhalation or expiration. This is important. These terms are important. When we breathe in, breathing in is called inhalation or expiration. The moment we breathe in, our air is completely entering inside here. As air is entering inside this particular place, our diaphragm, it is, you can just see here, our diaphragm moves down because air is, entering over there. There's so much of air filled here which pushes the diaphragm down. Our ribs are of course raised. You can just try it out. You breathe in and you see you are taking a deep breath in. Your ribs are completely raised and your thorax volume is increased. So the volume has increased because a lot of oxygen has entered. Diaphragm is contracting, it's moving downwards. In fact, even if you don't write the word contract, it is fine. Write it as moves down. So if diaphragm moves down, that's fine. And once you exhale, what happens? Air moves out. What happens when air moves out? The diaphragm, moves up. That is what it moves up, or it relaxes. Anyhow, you can just say it moves up, and your ribs move back, in its normal position. Volume of the thorax is now decreased because it is shrunken. It completely shrinks. You can see here. Here it is expansion and here it is contraction. So inhalation and exhalation, you need to know basic differences, nothing much. Just you need to know these things because it is important again from board exam point of view. One is an active process, the other is a passive process. And we usually know that this contraction and relaxation is important for our diaphragm. Now why is this diaphragm, why is this diaphragm so important? As I was talking about, even in case of digestion, yes, we missed out that part. In digestion, the diaphragm is very important because now imagine if there is, you have eaten something which is really really spicy food, okay, you have eaten a spicy food causing a lot of acidity, and sometimes people feel that pukish kind of feeling, you feel like vomiting. Now that you feel that something is stuck in between and you're not able, food is not up, not going down, that's because the diaphragm is getting affected over there. Even when you vomit, expulsion of, when expulsion of food comes out, due to this, it's basically because the diaphragm kind of moves, completely up, and that's when, completely things come out, not only air, even if you're vomiting also, a little part of the diaphragm is also able to come out, I mean it's coming up. So that is exactly what happens in case of that's why diaphragm is important for digestion. Here I would like to talk about a very important, aspect, that the moment, if ever experienced hiccups, why does this hiccups actually happen? Now, when you see air is completely drawn in, and between this inspiration and expiration, between these two processes, when it's not happening that properly, that is, when the air is not completely moving out, some amount of air is still present here, you will see that the diaphragm is pushing and trying to push the air out. When the diaphragm is trying to push the air outside, it sort of makes a sound which is hiccup. And that is what hiccups are all about. So I'll repeat that. It's not maybe very important, but yes, you need to know this. You can know this also, no doubt. The moment air enters inside, and the moment air has to, moment air has entered through inspiration and it has to move out, what happens is, we can see that the diaphragm actually will, is trying to sort of move back, that is, it is trying to push the air outside. Some amount of air will remain back. Now this is what causes hiccups. When you are eating food, when you're gobbling food completely, you're quickly eating, or you are suddenly tensed or something like that, you can see that the air, is a little bit present inside your lungs and it wants to go out. So the diaphragm makes an effort to kind of push it up, and as it's trying to make the air to push out, it makes a sound called hiccup, and that's why we call it as hiccups itself. So that's something for your knowledge that is important. Coming to your, yes, this we have already discussed. These are other respiratory organs to remember apart from, lungs already. So you need to know, of course, in amoeba or planaria, unicellular organisms, it is cell membrane, that is the respiratory organ. For earthworm, it is skin. Aquatic animals, it is gills. Insects, of course, it is spiracles, and even trachea for that matter. They have both of that. So this is something you need to remember. Some other important points. Now remember this, that when the size of the animal is large, diffusion cannot take place, and that is the reason why we have respiratory pigments. So that is why we have hemoglobin. There can be a question, why is hemoglobin important? It is not only important for transportation of oxygen to all parts of the body, it is also important to make sure that it takes up oxygen properly, efficiently, because as the size is larger, we cannot depend on simple diffusion process. We need respiratory pigments to do the job. Second point which is important is, now we see that the breathing rate in fishes is much faster than in case of, let's say, maybe a lizard, okay, because it's a terrestrial organism. So why is the breathing rate in fishes more than that of lizard? It's because the dissolved oxygen is very very low, and in order to get more oxygen, the breathing cycle has to be very very fast. The whole process has to become very very fast, and that is why the breathing cycle is more, because the dissolved oxygen is very very low, hence demand for oxygen. I'll repeat this. Since the dissolved oxygen is low, the demand for more oxygen, demand for more oxygen is high. Okay, and that is the reason why the breathing rate is also much faster than in case of terrestrial organisms. So these are some important points, and like I said, this is the pathway of how respiration actually takes place in case so from nostrils to pharynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchiole, lungs and alveoli. So please remember, after pharynx comes larynx. Larynx is the voice box. Okay, the throat is the pharynx, then larynx is the voice box. Pharynx contains a closing called as glottis, and it is guarded by epiglottis. So why is this epiglottis very important? Because epiglottis closes the glottis and prevents the entry of food into the respiratory tract. Now please remember, your trachea and your esophagus are next to each other, in fact one behind the other. So you can see that they are very important, because sometimes if you have ever felt like choking and you go breathless, it's because your epiglottis would not have functioned properly in closing your glottis. So that is the reason why it's very important. You need not go into the structure, but you just need to know that epiglottis is important because it closes another structure called glottis. In fact, if you want to know, it's something like this. So it actually closes the glottis and prevents the entry of food into the next passage. That is what it is. And larynx, of course, is associated with producing sound because it is formed of 9 cartilages. And windpipe is your trachea, and again it has got cartilaginous rings, and it prevents it supports the trachea and doesn't collapse usually. And your bronchi, you can see that the trachea here divides. Here it's shown bronchial tubes are present here, and bronchi and bronchioles, they help to carry the air from the trachea to the lungs, and your exchange of gases takes place in the alveoli. So that's very, very important. Alveoli acts like a filter, and it helps in exchange of gases. Oh, we missed out nostrils and nasal passages. Yes, they are lined with moist ciliated mucous membranes to trap the dust and germs, and of course it warms the air before it enters into the lungs. Okay, so this is very, very important. Few assignment questions, very few of them given. Make sure that it's solved, and interesting question is somewhere here, so you can think about it. Okay, something what herbivores eat and what we don't eat, and what does that contain, and what is it, how long does it take for it to get digested. So that's something which is very, very important. So I hope things are quite clear, and yes, these are the references for your knowledge. So I'll be back with the next part. We will be focusing on the circulatory system, and that's a very, very interesting topic. So stay tuned for the next video. Thank you.